Hello, all attendees are in listen mode, and welcome to the R3 2021 release webinar. I always love that little automated message in the beginning. It sounds so official. Hi, as the nameplate gives away beneath me here, my name is Carl Bergenhem. I'm the product manager for Kendo UI, and today I am joined by Alyssa Nicoll as well. Hi, Alyssa, how's it going?
Wonderful. So glad to be here. Welcome, everyone.
All right, well, we have a fully stacked session today, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I have a couple of housekeeping items before we jump into the actual what's new. So let's go ahead and jump through that a little bit. First of all, everything that we're covering today can be found on the What's New hub page on the Kendo UI website. So if you just Google Kendo UI What's New, or if you go to any one of the Kendo UI products and click on the What's New section in the top there, you'll be brought to this page. It gives you a deep dive into each of the individual items that we're discussing today, as well as links to demos and everything else. Also, because this question always pops up, we are recording this session. So if you can only join us for one product, a couple of products, or if you want to go back and rewatch the session here, no worries at all. We have that available on our YouTube channel, which you can find under youtube.com/KendoUITV. Now, during this webinar, you'll see on the right-hand side, we have a little chat box. You can type in questions. We have a huge amount of people just helping us out today, answering questions as you ask them. But you also have the ability to do this on Twitter with the hashtag #HeyKendoUI hashtag. And Alyssa and myself will try to keep an eye on that as we're presenting today. We might pick up some questions throughout this session where we'll be able to jump off a Twitter question. If not, we again have some helpers that can help us out on Twitter, and we can of course also follow up after the webinar today. An additional thing that we should mention is we are constantly streaming on Twitch. You can find us at twitch.tv/coditlive, where we dive into a ton of different topics. Today we're talking about Kendo UI, of course, but it really varies from general development topics into in-depth presentations around our components. There's a lot going on. And in fact, we actually did a little bit of a stream around some of the what's new items with R3, both on Thursday last week. We covered a little bit about React, and then on Friday, we covered a little bit about Angular. We actually have a poll question about that coming up in a couple of slides as well. And now some general highlights for R3 2021. I don't want to give away any spoilers really for all the sections that we have coming up here, but just to give you a look at all the new and good pieces from Angular, including new components and features. Same thing with React. You can see that we have some exciting new components like the PivotGrid that just dropped with the React library, as well as something you'll see actually across all these products. We have Bootstrap 5 support. We've also enhanced our theme picker across all demos that we have available. So there's some items that you can see that are a little bit common throughout all the flavors. On the jQuery side, we added some new components as well. Again, Bootstrap 5 support, jQuery 3.6.0 support, and a couple of more items related to accessibility. And on the view side of things, we covered quite a lot with this release, added in data visualizations with charts and Sparkline, as well as PDF exportation. And the reason, by the way, that I'm not diving into each one of these in detail is that that is precisely what this webinar is about, and I do not want to take away from any of the good, juicy sections that we have coming up here. Now, to give everybody an idea of kind of a time frame, depending on if you're joining us for a particular product or if you're just interested in how today is going to go, we're going to start off with Kendo UI for Angular. Then we're going to jump into Kendo React and cover what's new there. Then it's Kendo UI for jQuery's turn, and then it's Kendo UI for Vue's turn. And you see here kind of the rough timestamps for when we'll start each section, and we'll try to keep to that. I'll also come back to this slide and kind of scratch out which ones we've covered so you can get an idea of where we are in case you're coming in and out of the webinar today. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and stop the housekeeping pieces and give the floor to Alyssa, who's going to cover what is new in Kendo UI for Angular.
Yay, thank you. All right, I'm going to share my screen and boop, boop, boop. Let's share that one. Awesome, you all should be able to see it in all of its glory. So yes, my name is Alyssa Nicoll, and I have the pleasure of covering the Angular updates. So, you know, raise the roof, emojis in the chat for Angular. But I want to share out again. So at Alyssa Nicoll is my Twitter handle, and then at Kendo UI. And then if you use the hashtag of Hey Kendo UI with your questions, we will see them, we will answer them. You will be known and heard. So yes, as mentioned, we do have a Code It Live channel, and we were live streaming all last week with updates and kind of diving into demo codes, that's a word, the demo apps that we have built. And so those video recordings are actually available on our YouTube channel as well if you missed them. But I am starting up JavaScript Girl in a .NET World again after a short break, and then UI Fridays is actually returning soon. So check out Code It Live. We've got tons of content. And that leads us straight into our first of 4 poll questions. And this one is, of course, about Code It Live. So were you there? Did you make it last week to any of our live streams is what we're curious about. The options are I joined the React one, I joined the Angular one, I made both, I couldn't make it, or I didn't know about it. We of course did have some .NET streams as well for those products, but we are specifically just polling on these. So let us know if you were able to make it and which one you made. And I will let everybody know. Oh my goodness, the answers are coming in. Okay, so far we've got about 10% that joined the Angular one, about 30% couldn't make it, and about 60% didn't know about it, and 5 joined the React one. It is so good to see you again. If you are here and you were there, you joined us. So thanks for, you know, double dipping and joining us on this fun ride. But if you didn't know about it, now you do. Every release, we always do a very official one with slides, and we walk through in a more orderly fashion. But then either before or after the official webinar, we'll have some live streams. And so, yeah, thank you for answering that question. It was beautiful, beautiful information that will help us. And I'm actually I'm gonna screenshot that data. You all are brilliant. Okay, so moving on. Carl, he always writes just like the most killer blog posts. And I thought I would try something different during this webinar where I made bit.ly links. What? Because sometimes the URLs are a little long. I don't know if you know that. So if you want to check out an article that will have links to all the components and features that I'll be walking through, and they'll have like screenshots and things, go ahead and type that in right now. This is the one that you'll want to follow along with. But without further ado, let's dive into Angular release 2021. Okay, so this is the high-level snapshot of the new components and the new features, and even new things that don't fit into components or features, new things that we're offering in the ecosystem to support you as developers. So let's dive in. I'm going to do features first and then components, and if we have time, I will even show a little demo app where I implemented some of those and share the GitHub link. But again, if you missed it, our live stream will have more content, and so check out our Kendo UI YouTube channel. So our grid got pager position and keyboard navigation. So it was a wonderful quality of life improvement to now have the ability to control the pager position. And so if I go ahead and click that, you should be able to see, yeah, there it goes. The GIF animating where the pager, you can see with all of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5s is at the top, the bottom, or both. I know this is a really small screenshot GIF, but sometimes your grid is massive. And so if you're at the very bottom of it, it might be more convenient to actually have it on both so they don't have to scroll back all the way. Just depends on what your grid looks like. But there was also accessibility improvements. And there is the bit.ly link as promised. One second. Pardon me. Okay. So there will be bit.ly links as we go through. So check that out if you want. It will take you straight to the docs. And so I also, of course, have the little green link that will help you out. But there were accessibility improvements, which now have built-in support for keyboard navigation, thanks to these efforts. Yay! So let's go to the next one. Our grid also got placeholders during virtualization. I love this so much. Last release, we announced our skeleton component. If you don't know about it, you need to know about it. It's rivaling for my favorite component. It is. It's like, oh, it's gorgeous. But we implemented that skeleton component whenever you're virtualizing your data. And so yes, you can see that GIF animating right now, where you're scrolling up and the data hasn't loaded yet. And so there is these like placeholder skeletons for each piece of data that's going to load, which is really, really great for user feedback, because if you don't have anything there, right, we are coupling it obviously with like a loader indicator as well, a loading indicator. But if you don't have anything there and you've just got these empty rows as you scroll because the data hasn't loaded in yet, it's a very broken experience. And so I love this, it's very wonderful, intuitive feedback coming in. If I go to the next one, there's the Bentley link to check it out. On some of these, I'm also testing out. So if you have your mobile device, you can scan the slide on the screen, and you should be able, in the bottom left corner there, see the little, what do we call that? QR code?
QR
I think it's
code.
called QR code. I'm going, thank you! I was like, I think it's a QR code, but this one has a dinosaur. So does that change its, no. Okay, it's now and it's still QR code.
If you want to call it a dino code, I guess we can.
Dino code. I use Chrome, and so I think that link will take you to in a Chrome browser. But either the Bitly link or those will both work if you're interested in checking out the feature or component when it comes to that slide. So yeah, let me know if you like that. I can keep going with that next webinar, or we can throw it out altogether if it was an absolutely horrible idea. So the grid got a lot of love during this one. The next part is they built out a sample for drag and drop between two different grids. It's mind-blowing. I know, it's really exciting. Let me, I think I've got, yeah, there's the bit.ly. So check out this bit.ly if you're interested in how to accomplish that. I really, really love this because it's not necessarily a new feature, right? Like the drag and drop has existed, but it's our team of engineers, beautiful engineers, by the way. I think most of them are listening in, showing you and teaching you how to use our components the proper way in Angular to accomplish this. So check out that really, really cool demo. I was super excited about that. The tree list. Okay, onto a new component with the new features. So the tree list also has a new sample for drag and drop. And yes, there's the GIF and the bit.ly link as well. And so this goes along with the last one. I was so excited to see the team supporting our developers in a new way by creating more samples. And I think if you'll notice, it's the URL is /components/knowledge base, and then drag and drop for the tree list. And I think the knowledge base is just a really cool part of our docs. If you haven't perused, you should definitely check it out. The TabStrip, closable tabs was added with a closable option that you can add to your tabs. So check out, yes, the GIF is going, and there's a bit.ly, but you add to it and it allows you to close those out. Super simple, but also it's super simple to take advantage of, but it adds a lot, right, that in this configuration option. So super excited about that.
And something to note, by the way, is you can define that on a tab by tab basis, so it doesn't have to be across all tabs, which is nice too. So if you want a little bit more granular control over it, in fact, the toggling item there does not have a closable icon with it. So yeah, it's neat that you have that control. You don't just have to define the entire thing as closable. You can do that on a tab by tab basis.
Thank you for that. If you have any more like juicy bits, you should definitely interject as we go.
Oh yeah, I'll jump in.
Yep. Thank you. And I'm checking my time. We are 15 minutes into mine. We're okay. I'm just seeing if we'll have time for demos, but if we don't, the videos are on YouTube. You don't need to sweat. No sweat is needed. Okay. The TabStrip also got scrollable tabs. So let's go to one more further so you can see it in action. And so the tab strip now, I'm assuming this is for very confined spaces where you don't have the luxury of displaying all of your tabs. And so now you can scroll left or right through the collection of tabs to see the specific one that you need. So check out that bit.ly if that's something that you're interested in. And if as we're going through, if one of these features or components really hits your heart and you're like, finally, we want to hear about that. So throw a message in the chat and let us know if something is like the creme de la creme and something you were waiting for, because we love hearing that feedback. That is a really big QR code. You're welcome. This is for the auto scroll during drag and drop. So the tree view can now automatically scroll when users are dragging or dropping nodes within the tree view. It becomes a huge improvement when dealing with large lists, as you can imagine. And I do have a bit.ly link for that in case you are not a QR code scanner person. But yes, check out the auto scroll during drag and drop. All right. The tree view also has auto expanded nodes on filter. So I go ahead and click through here. You should be able to see the GIF animating, which is so cool. So as you're typing in your filtering, right, the nodes are expanding for what is relevant. And I don't know, it just looks so smooth. I love the tree view. She has like the tree list, I think, is #1 still. I don't think skeleton could beat it out, but tree view's up there in my mind of cool components. It's just so feature rich and so I don't know, implemented well. I love it. So check out the auto expanding nodes on filter. Next up, MultiSelectTree now has client side filtering. So if all of the tree view data is available on the client side, then the filtering mechanism will quickly reduce the list of available nodes. So if you see, yeah, you can see the animating GIF as you start searching, and then those nodes are being eliminated if they don't match the search. I love it. Super cool. MultiSelectTree. Next up is our editor. So we have a preserve white space option and a focus. I think maybe is that option on focus and blur events, or it's and focus? No, it's two different things. So all new preserve white space option, which the name gives away. And there's the bit.ly link if you want to check it out. And it ensures that white space within the editor is preserved and not stripped away, which I actually have a hilarious story about white space. I was trying to style something with the CSS empty. It's like :empty selector. And apparently in CSS3, if you have white space of any kind, or even like comments of any kind, that element in the DOM is not considered empty. So I don't know. I think white space is it's super valuable. Don't worry, CSS4 is getting rid of that. But I love that we're preserving white space now in our editor. We have,
I was going to say,
another...
today I learned that was not something that that I was aware of. So nice.
I know. Watch out for your comments.
Yeah.
Because I throw comments around liberally in my markup, and I've never had to pay for it before. You know, I'm like, this is this thing, that is that thing. I was thinking this on this day and had this for lunch, right? Like anything and everything is allowed in comments, and it was a shock to learn. So, so yes, additionally with R3 2021. The editor also added focus and blur events. So check out that bit.ly link if you want to play around with the new updated editor. Let's see, who is next? Our scroll view. And sorry for going so fast. We have a ton of new features, like so many. And if we want demo time at all, we've got to book it. But I hope that your questions are being answered, or that your exciting comments are being commiserated with. I don't know if that's the right term. But yes, if you have any questions, hashtag #HeyKendoUI on Twitter, or throw it in the chat. So the scroll view now has, let me make sure that GIF gets up here, either a dark or a light pager option. And you can see it animating on the bottom of the scroll view, which is really, really freaking cool, especially because depending on what content you have behind it, it might make a difference. Or if you have like a light or a dark theme on your page, it makes a huge difference as well. What is next? Oh, yes. Our color picker and color gradient. And I always get these two confused. So color picker, Carl, is on, I think the left, and then color gradient is on the right, because you have obviously like the RGBA options. And
Yeah,
then
it's
yes, and it's, I was like, I'm pretty sure that's right. Am I
it's a
mixing
little
up my
bit
lefts and
tricky.
rights?
Yeah. First of all, also the webcam makes it even tougher because it's
Oh, I'm
reversed,
like,
I think.
where are you
Yeah.
seeing?
But the color picker is technically when you have that drop down and you can select the color. That's technically the color picker component that's in charge of that. And then we have the color palette or the color gradient kind of component that builds into it. So on the left hand side, you have the palette version that you have a predefined palette that you can select from, and then the color gradient is on the right hand side where you have a full gradient you can select from. But technically, because they're both in that drop down, they're both actually the color picker component, just in two different modes that we have available.
Oh, okay. Wait, so it's the same component, you just toggle like an attribute or something
Yeah,
to get the
exactly.
different views?
Yep. In this particular
Okay.
case, you can also, if you don't want to have that available in a dropdown, just have the element displayed. It's either the palette that you see on the left or the gradient on the right, just have that permanently be
Yeah.
displayed without being hidden behind a
Oh,
dropdown.
not a
You
dropdown.
can just add those
Okay.
components separately. So we kind of built it up that way to give you some choice. But both happen to be color pickers, but that doesn't take away from the fact that the color picker and the color gradient receive some improvements with the keyboard navigation and localization.
Yeah, that's wonderful, and I love to see it. I think we've got actually quite a few accessibility improvements across our components this release, so it's exciting to see.
We do.
So those bit.ly links are in correlation with either one if you're interested in checking out. We also have a floating label update, custom CSS support, and position change event. So the Angular label component now officially supports custom CSS. I didn't know that it did not. I did not know that was a thing. I don't know if I had tried customizing it. The floating label is like so mind-blowing. Let me make sure I pull up the GIF so you can all see what we're talking about here. I don't know if you've ever tried to implement this, where essentially your placeholder turns into a label by floating above it, but it's not the easiest thing in the world it's not easy to build out yourself flawlessly. And now we offer customizing it. Like, that's mind-blowing and kind of terrifying. I feel like if I was allowed to like touch all the things, I would break them all, but I'm super excited about that. And also the position change event has been added as well, which is a really, really valuable addition to the API. So check it out if you're into the floating labels. We have the split button is up next. The change the type of the main button. Now this is something I wanted to actually ask Carl about. So the Angular split button, as of this release, added the ability for developers to change the type of the main button, which I'm assuming, if I bring up this, you can go ahead and pull it up yourself. I'm assuming it's talking about the thing that actually like triggers the drop-down event.
Yes.
I'm assuming that's what main button is. Okay.
Yeah, so this just gives you a little bit more flexibility when it comes to, because we have a lot of button types. So this just gives you a little bit of flexibility for what's available initially and how that looks. And then, of course, you can still control all the items underneath. Like you see, we have some with icons, we have some with text, etc.
I think the word split button throws me off and scares me a little bit. I'm like, it's a very intimidating component name. Like, split button? What are we doing to this button? Okay, I'm with you now, though.
Yeah. The split is because it's technically split between the button element and the drop-down element, right? So that's kind of where that name comes from. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no buttons were harmed during the filming of this webinar or the making of this release.
Or the making or filming of this webinar.
Yeah.
This next one is a really, really cool feature. I know we are touting it specifically for Angular, but it's actually, Figma kits are now available for, I think, really all of our products, right? React, Angular, Vue, Blazor, jQuery, .NET, all the things. And I would love to hear in the chat. Let us know if you're actively using Figma kits. I keep seeing them in the wild, like with random friends who are working on projects or have clients, and they'll have their big beefy Figma kits to go along with like the tickets. And so I'm just really impressed with how Figma is blowing up right now, and I love that our team is supporting it. We have 30 Kendo UI for Angular components, and the list is growing as we speak. And so check out, do I have a linky link? I do. Check out the bit.ly. It'll take you to our docs on our Figma kit. And also shout out in the chat if you're using it. I would love to know how many of you are taking advantage of Figma kits nowadays. So yes, the other, I think there's actually 2 more under the features section, but is Bootstrap 5 support. So we are actually supporting both Bootstrap 4 and 5 with the current version of our components. Carl made this really cool GIF. Yeah, I want to show you of just like flopping between 4.5 and 5 and just seeing some of those UI differences between them. But yes, check out our, I think the next feature, the next and final feature that I'm going to highlight is how you can go and check those out right now in our docs. So in our docs, all of our like theme picker dropdowns where you can go between like default, bootstrap, and material have been updated to now have swatches for each one of those. And so it's not just the basic default theme, bootstrap theme, or material theme, but also augmented versions of those that you can choose. And then our docs remember, they remember everything. They remember your selection. So as you peruse through different components, they will have that theme. And so I know Carl was talking about a lot of different clients found swatches useful because they would find one that was closer to their branding so that as they looked through the components, it would be closer to the look and feel that they would be receiving when they implemented them. So it's very, very cool. I love it. And it's also a way to check out the latest Bootstrap updates in the UI. So I think we're ready for a second poll question. So let's cue that up and give everybody a moment. So yes, let's see. Boop, boop, boop. Can you actually see the question, Carl?
Yeah, I can read it off real quick.
I see the answer, but I don't see the question.
Which statement is the most true regarding your organization's approach to choosing component libraries? Is it that we standardize on one vendor and use this product in all projects? We evaluate and choose libraries on a project by project basis, or we haven't used third-party components, which if you haven't, welcome to the ultimate third-party component warehouse, Kendo UI. So yeah, we'll see what people are filling in here in terms of answers in a second.
Excellent. Excellent. It's looking like, man, I really need to like expand this window so that I can see.
Yeah, it's pretty close actually.
Answer. Yeah, it's like 50% versus 40%. Awesome. So I think the attendees are now viewing the poll results. So it was 54%, we evaluate and choose libraries, and then 40% we standardize on one vendor, and then 5% we haven't used third-party components. So welcome if you're new to the third-party component game. As someone, I'm a developer advocate. That word did not sound right just now. I'm a developer advocate, obviously, for Angular and our components. But it goes both ways, and I take community feedback and bring that to the team often, and keep a heartbeat on the community and where things are at. And so if you've never tried a third-party component, I'm just here to tell you that you're in the right place. Before this was a developer at a company, and I had a lot of trouble working with a different component library and customizing that and building out just super custom CSS and super custom components. And I have had the pleasure now for the last 3 years of working alongside Kendo UI components, and it's just night and day difference. So I think you're in the right place. Welcome, and we are here to help you on that journey. So we covered all of those new features. We covered also the kits, the Figma kits, the Bootstrap support, and our new theme pickers. But now it's time for the 3 new components. And I think we might have time, might have a little bit of time at the end to walk through some demo. So let's get into it.
Yeah, we need the like the laser
3...
button, like the like we need that to go off when we talk about the new components. I can only do the sound.
I need a little sound effect.
Like I just did. You know, I don't have the button to make that sound, so that's what everybody has to deal with.
I love it. You're like, you're welcome. That's for you.
Yeah, you're welcome, everybody.
So the first component I wanted to talk about was the Gantt chart, which I think React got, might have been 1 or 2 releases ago, and I was super jelly, and I was like, why do we not get the Gantt? And so it is a type of bar chart. If you have never heard of it, you are with good company. Before this, I was like, wait, what is this mystical chart? But essentially, it's for project management so that you can see different tasks over a period of time and how they relate to each other and how they relate to the cycle as a whole. So it is a very large and in charge component that had a lot of features like to implement within it. Carl, do you know, I saw the beta tag on it and I didn't know. Are we still in beta on the Gantt? What's
yes.
the
so there's a couple of features that we just need to make sure that we add in there. Just to make sure that's 100% polished. You know, it's already in a good state. So my recommendation is always when you see a beta tag is double check if the features so they're available for you. If they are, you know, we support it fully. It has nothing to do with the level of support that you get through the support ticketing system. It might just be a couple of features that we want to make sure are there for, you know, the official version, but we still want it to get into the hands of everybody because we're almost there. So between this release and of course items that we're tackling coming up with the upcoming releases, that beta tag will eventually be gone. But definitely feel free to tinker around with it, play around with it, see if it's something that can fit into your applications, and let us know if there's anything that's missing, and we'll make sure that we add it in.
Very cool, absolutely. And I would love to hear in the chat how many are excited about the Gantt, if that's something that you're implementing on your projects. I'd love to hear that. Next up is the heat map. Woo! So the heat map is suitable for visualizing data with this kind of color scale, as you can see. This example of the heat map, of course, is for like contributions. I think you can see these type of maps on GitHub. So you can see the warmer days are more contributions on those days, and so it's like a bolder red versus the lighter red or the white where no contributions are. So it's a really cool component to help you visualize data. And of course, it is part of our Angular data visualization library, which means that the content is rendered as SVG elements. So it was really fun to see. And I had a lot of, actually I have the link, if you're not a QR code person, there's the link. I had a lot of fun playing around with the color schemes and customizing that. And so in the demo that I will show you, it takes all sorts of parameters for color. It's really, really cool. And so we'll actually pull that up in the docs, and then I'll take you into our custom demo in a second. And the last one, and this one does rival my heart for top place with skeleton component, the new Angular typography directive let me go ahead and pull up the bit.ly link. There's so much to it. So if you're like, wait, what is this magical directive? There are so many things that you can do with it. You can do text transforms, font weights, change using our theme colors, change the color, the text align, the font size, and of course the big one that I didn't include but I will show in the demo is variations. And so you can essentially specify, I need this div to be an H1, or I need this H1 to look like an H4, right? And then you specify that variation. Really freaking cool. I know React also got this. I don't know about jQuery and Vue this release, but it's so fun to see the different, because if you missed the stream, again, didn't know about it, Catherine, our new developer advocate for React, actually built a really custom, really super sweet demo in the Star Trek universe. And she actually showed off utilizing the typography directive, and it was so cool to see the differences between how it's implemented in React versus how it's implemented in Angular. And so check out those videos on the YouTubes. I'm gonna do something a little funky now and swap the screen. 1 second, I'm sharing, and now I'm changing to my main screen. And now you can see this, and I'm escaping. And now you can see me and Carl and our beautiful faces. Awesome. Okay. So I'm now going to show you, for those of you who are new to webinars and haven't been here over the last few releases, I took the Tour of Heroes application that John Papa originally wrote and that's used throughout the Angular docs to teach people new concepts in Angular. I took that Tour of Heroes application and I modified the heck out of it, and I made it pony themed, My Little Pony themed. So we are going, let me go ahead and swipe over to this. So for those of you who have not seen the Tour of Heroes before, there's a little bit of it's a little different. I augmented it. So you have a dashboard of heroes, and of course my heroes are all the ponies. And these are actually Kendo UI cards that I customized. And if you scroll down, as I mentioned, I've used this application throughout releases, and it's kind of my go-to place to test out components. And so you'll see here that as you scroll down, I also have the expansion panel, and I've got like drag and drop enabled here with the cards so that you can like reorganize the ponies. And then I've also implemented some fun things like the heat map or the Gantt chart. So really excited about this. I'm gonna go back over to the code in a second, but if you want to check it out, my GitHub name is Alyssa Nicoll, and I will show you. Maybe if I can find it, Alyssa Nicoll. Sorry, the go-to panel is kind of in my view, and your repos. And Kendo UI Tour of Hero Releases. That's the link you want. And this is where I have, this is where I will push up right after this so that you have all of these really cool updates. Oh, I just realized I'm in Chrome. But on this sidebar here, sometimes it doesn't always make sense for the ponies to, like, I don't know. I mean, Carl brought up a really good point on the live stream. He said that the ponies can 100% use a Gantt chart, to organize their daily lives in the kingdom. I didn't think about that. That's actually brilliant. But sometimes the components don't make sense in the Tour of Heroes application. So I wanted to make sure that I was implementing them live somewhere in the app. So this sidebar is actually where you can find out like the ng-add command, a little bit of a description for each component. And then here's the typography one we were talking about. And then if we go all the way down to the Gantt, you can see a Gantt in a much smaller space than it was ever meant to be seen. But also I have the R2 with a skeleton, bottom navigation, and you can just keep scrolling and check them all out. And they are actually working little live examples of that component. But the cool part about that is if we go over to the code, I will make it to the code at some point. Hold. Okay. There we go. If we go over to the code and we check out our sidebar here in the markup, this is where I either put it in line because I was a very lazy person, or I broke it out into a component. So here we have our Kendo cards, and I know it's like component inception where I'm putting new components inside of Kendo cards, and it's like, wow, how deep does it go? Components in components. I know, it's fine. Don't be scared. But inside of each of these Kendo cards, you can check out here, I've implemented that heat map that we were just checking out. And I've thrown in this F03C97 because that's like the hot pink, the pony pink color of this app. But you can also just throw in, which I think it might actually need to be a string. Oh wait, if I do this, I don't think it needs to be a string. Hold, let's find out together. Let us find out together if I broke this application. And there's lime green, beautiful. So
yeah,
it takes like, I did, I know, right? I'm so proud of myself. So it takes keywords, it takes hexes. I'm a goof because I don't know why I did the double quotes. Sometimes I get deep within the data. Okay. So this is also linking up to this data. And again, all of this is live here. So check out the sidebar component if you want to dive deeper into it. I'm going to collapse this and move right on down to the typography component, which is so much fun. I know maybe you're not like that excited about it, but to have this consistency across your app and to also have the ability to customize it is just like absolutely mind-boggling. So let me show you what I'm talking about. Here we have this H1. And I don't know how many times I've heard someone say, like I'll be cleaning up their front end and I'll be like, why did you choose that here? And they'll be like, oh, because I needed it to look like that. And that should be like the biggest red flag of all time. If you're choosing a component because you need it to be styled a certain way. I mean, that's why God gave us CSS, right? So that we could customize components, customize the heck out of components. So this typography directive allows you to change the look of the H1 without changing its semantics. So if you actually need an H1, like it's the highest header on the page, but you don't want it to look like an H1, you can throw on this variant here. And the variants go all the way from H1 to H6, and then after that, P for paragraph. So we could throw on a P here if we wanted as well. And if we go, let's go check out this, and we're gonna open up. Boop, boop, boop. I did break something. I did. I broke something horrible. I think it's mad about my hex. I must have messed something up. I'm just gonna undo until the hex is fixed again, and then I will debug that later. I wonder if it's because it's like a special character. All right, let's see. Yeah, there it goes. It's happy with me again. I'm gonna have to look into why I messed up my hex. Okay, we're gonna open up the inspector. I'm gonna collapse that bar so I can see everything. And we're gonna make this like so much larger because no one can read that. No one could possibly read that. Okay, and ignore my warnings. I'm aware of them and leaving them be, all right? So we're gonna go grab our inspector and check out this H1. Boop, boop, boop. And you'll see here that the H1 is still an H1, but it has been given a class, and I'm gonna make this a little bit smaller so it can be on one line. It has been given a class of KH4, and it's now being styled. You can see this is our normal H1, and it's now being styled like an H4, even though it is an H1, which is really, really great for semantics and accessibility concerns when you need to customize something and you need it to look a certain way. I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to go back over to the code, and real quick, I wanted to show, let's collapse this card, go back to the typography. I wanted to show, I don't know if you've ever tried customizing, but here in my, check out my styles.scss, at the very top, I have some custom Kendo UI base variables. And so I am actually, this is where you can go in and change things like font size. If I go ahead and comment out all these variables, font size extra small, font size small, right? I comment them out. We no longer see them. We're gonna go check out the application without those custom tidbits. She's gonna take a second, and I'll tell you why she's taking so long. There's two reasons. Okay, if you'll notice, they're all much, much smaller now. Like this is the base H1 size, this is the base H4 size. And it's super teeny tiny. At least it looks teeny tiny in comparison to my ridiculously large application. It shows when I restyled the Tour of Heroes to have like an H1 with a font size of like 80 pixels, right? It's ridiculous, it's huge. And so oftentimes when you think, oh, I can't use this typography directive because their base variables are too small, well, that's where our team has already thought ahead of you, and you'll see these variables here, they're actually coming from my variables file, but I pasted and commented them here so that you could, boop, boop, so that you could check them out and see, oh, not those. Well, that was me doing a different, I was trying out different variables. These are what cockroach, mouse, pony, horse, bear, these are what these variables are. And I put them up there in the comments just so that you would be able to see them and know what I was plugging in there as defaults, but I am importing those variables. So this is just an example, and then as you can see, I'm importing that typography SCSS here. I'm importing that after I customize the variables that I want. Now you can import all right here. And that would go ahead and allow you to customize, I mean, like, for instance, our base background for every single component, right? But that is going to add all of the loading onto the build process. And so what that means is every time you make a change in your UI and you go back over to see it, you're going to see that load time. Now our docs go into some things, workarounds around that can help you. But what we highly suggest is if you're going to customize our components, go ahead and bring in the style sheet of the components that you need, not all of them. We highly recommend, unless you're using all 100 of our components. And then if you are, fantastic. But yes, this is how you customize and include those styles. Usually, if I go back to not package, if I go back to, it's not JSON. I think it's my app module, which for some reason I'm blanking on. Hold. Let's collapse all of these. Sometimes you just get like a little, there we go. If I go back to, oh, it's not app module. Forgive me, everybody. Oh, I wanted to share with you, there's two reasons. One is because I'm going and customizing our styles, so I'm loading those into our global style sheet every time on build. And the other reason is because of our in-memory data service, which mocks data. And so I actually have a little bit of a delay, but we can see things like loading indicators. If we go back over to our, closing that, our heroes page, or really, we can click on any hero. It doesn't have to be from here. And when we load that in, you'll see, because I'm slowing down that data load, you can see like our skeleton components holding a placeholder. So that's why the data is a little slow if you pull this down. I think there's one other thing I want to talk about, but I'm totally out of time. So do check out, I'm gonna stop the screen sharing, go back over there and let Carl take over control for the next section. But do check out our Kendo UI videos on our YouTube channel, because we went into a little bit more detail. So yeah.
All right, awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Alyssa. I know there's a lot to cover in Angular, and there's a lot to cover in all the products. So yeah, it's jam-packed today, so no worries on the time there. But for those of you interested that are joining us for the long haul and covering everything today, we do have this schedule, right? So we just finished Kendo UI for Angular. So next is React. We're going to talk about KendoReact for about 40 minutes or so. Then it's Kendo UI for jQuery, and then Kendo UI for Vue. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into KendoReact. And as a reminder, just before we dive into each of the individual pieces here, you see that we have a ton of new components, a lot of new things, either from a design perspective with the Figma kits and the Bootstrap 5 support. We got some grid enhancements, we got treeless and Gantt additions, there's a ton out there, right? So I'm going to try to cover everything here, but if for some reason I do not manage to cover everything, we do have not just the what's new page, we have my what's new blog post, as well as what you'll see when we jump into the demos, that each one of our documentation and demos page will also have a note of which packages have been updated and which are new. So that helps you kind of navigate through all this as well on your own. But to start off with, the PivotGrid, a big component that I know a lot of folks have been asking for on the React side, and I'm glad to say that with this release, we added in the official first version of the React PivotGrid. I'm sure for those of you that are familiar with pivoting, what's nice about what we've done on the Kendo React side, and this is actually something that if you're a Kendo UI user from the past, you might have seen that we have a PivotGrid on the jQuery side of things. We actually went through and we updated the design of the PivotGrid. So this is something that's brand new in terms of design, in terms of features and functionality as well. So there's a ton of cool stuff to see in the PivotGrid, and I'll cover a little bit more details around how to deal with PivotGrids and data when we jump into the demos. Another new component that we added with this release is the React MultiSelectTree. So the name is kind of a mouthful, I guess, but the name also gives it away. It's a multi-select component, which is an input that, as you see on the image, that provides tokens either through what we have here with the little pill and the X, or you can also just do text strings with a comma or semicolon or something like that, separating them. But the idea here is that users can open up this dropdown, so it's just a simple input element to begin with, and then they can select items that are now displayed in a integrated tree view component inside of the component. So it's a multi-select component with the tree in it, hence multi-select tree. But that, of course, is a fun component to be able to have because it does marry two of our more popular components and is great when you need to save a little bit of screen real estate, but still allow users to be able to navigate through a little bit more complex data than just a simple data list. We also got the Heatmap component on the React side. So just as Alyssa mentioned, right, the Heatmap component, probably the most famous implementation of it in the development world is that contribution graph within GitHub. But of course, you can use it for so many other scenarios. What's really nice is that all you have to do to get this gradient color is just to find the primary color that you want the highest value to be, essentially. And then we can go through and automatically do the gradient for you. You can also, of course, if you want to control the scale, we have some ability for you to do that as well. So there's some pretty cool things you can do with data visualization within a heat map. We don't want to limit you to just one color and a range that provides you. So you have a full capability of customizing the look and feel of this component. This is a part of the data visualization package. So what's nice is that it renders as an SVG element or even a canvas element, and you can toggle between the two with a configuration option. We also added a breadcrumb component with this release. I'm sure a ton of you have seen this in various different documentations out in the wild, right, including our own website. But the React breadcrumb kind of, intuitively gives it away, right? It allows you to have a deeper folder structure within something like documentation, and then users can very easily go back to higher levels if they're deep in that hierarchy. In this particular case, for example, we're probably working with a website maybe like Amazon or Newegg or something like that, where eventually you might come into computer gaming and you say, you know what, I want to see some other computer stuff like accessories or keyboards, whatever it might be. So you can click on computer and get back to that as well. And you can also see that we have the ability to integrate icons as well as just plain text. We also added the typography component, which is exciting for those of you looking to create consistency across either your one application or multiple applications. So the idea here is that the typography component, especially if you're relying on the KendoReact themes that we have available, can inherit all the styles that are available within the theme that you currently have selected. So that means that you ensure that all H1s throughout your entire application look and feel the same. Same thing with H2s, 3s, 4s, etc., down to H6. And then we have a lot of different other forms of font styling, of course, you can work with. So this is something that if you're building a design language or just working on that consistency across the application, having that component just readily available ensures that your users and other developers don't necessarily have to interact with CSS as much. So if you want to keep the CSS kind of separate by itself and you control it while others just kind of inherit from it, the typography component is a great component to use. Similarly, we added a couple of different stack and grid layout components here. And that also is, again, if you don't necessarily want to write the CSS and have something that's a little bit more just, you can drop it in, configure it real quickly, and then you can work with the CSS that is already available out of the box through the KendoReact themes. The stack layout is great because it allows you to create this interface that we see here of these 3 stack cards, and you can actually define if you want it to be a vertical or horizontal orientation and add in spacing, etc., just through the configuration options available within the component. The grid layout takes that idea and it provides, as the name kind of gives away, a structured way for you to be able to define the layout using a grid. So columns, rows, and within each row, you can of course define multiple columns as well. So it provides similar structure to what you see with CSS grid layout. However, some feedback that we received from our customers were just, hey, it would be great to have this as a standalone component, so I don't necessarily have to directly work with CSS grid, and hence the React grid layout. Now, if you jump into some of the new features available in existing components, we have the auto column size, which you hopefully can see here. Oh, actually, I included a GIF with a bug in it. Don't worry about that. when we jump into the demos, you will see that we actually, that category name does not disappear. It actually fits to the current size or whatever is available within the category name column. That's fun. We get to see something live and in action here, just in my GIF. But yeah, the idea here, right, is that you double click on that spacing in between two columns, and it will automatically adjust the size to ensure that whatever's on the left-hand side of that will automatically fit to just what's available either in the header or the content of each one of the cells. So it kind of takes into account both header and what's available in the rows. We also added the ability for you to group and ungroup via the column menu. So a lot of end users, so not necessarily developers, but end users of your applications, they interact a lot with the KendoReact grid through the column menu. So what we added in with this release is the ability to also decide if you want to group by a particular column, or if that column is already grouped, ungroup as well. I don't know if there's a better word for taking away a group than ungrouping, but I'm going to say group and ungroup. And you can now do that directly through the column menu, and rather than having the drag and drop interface that we previously have known, or doing this programmatically yourself. We also did a lot of accessibility improvements with the grid for this release. So we mentioned a lot on our website that we have accessibility compliance now, Section 508, WCAG 2.1 support. We have everything listed out, from A to AAA within our documentation. But even then, we still like to take a look at our components and see how we can continue to improve accessibility. So essentially, we've improved the way the screen readers interact with the grid component. We've improved some of the underlying accessibility. And all you need to do to take advantage of this to make your grid more accessible is update to the latest version. Nice and easy. We also added some features to the tree list component, specifically allowing you to do a range selection for multiple cells. So we've always had selection available within the component. You can do it kind of on a row by row basis or individual cells, but now you have this range selection that allows you to drag your mouse over cells and select the ones in a range. Similarly, we did the same thing on the Gantt chart as well. So the Gantt chart has the kind of the tree list like interface over on the left hand side, where you have all the items listed out in hierarchical fashion. There might be something that you want to do in terms of selecting them and either being able to do a bulk edit or be able to extract data from it. So just like you saw in the tree list, you can now drag your mouse over a particular set of cells in order to be able to grab those cells in a range. An additional improvement that we did for an existing component is the tooltip now has the ability to create tooltips for SVG elements. So if you have any SVG elements, like for example, in this screenshot, we happen to have an SVG element of our Kendoka, and we have now the KendoReact tooltip attached to that SVG element. So this is generically, you can attach it to any custom SVG element that you've created, or something that potentially comes out of the box. With KendoReact, for example, attach more tooltips to that, even though for most cases, like our charts, our maps, etc., we have some of that baked in. Either way, if you have SVG elements and you want to provide a little bit more context to users about what they're all about, you can go ahead and use the KendoReact tooltip. We also added the ability for you to create custom content on the KendoReact chip. So this is something that actually popped up quite a lot from our users who are actively using the React chip component and the chip list. So now, before you could do some customization, but now you can define a lot of more custom types of your chips. So icons, you can add links, or really any other HTML in there if you like to. That means, of course, with great power comes great responsibility. So watch out what you put in there in case you try to break the chip component and make it something completely different.
Are you saying don't put a full paragraph in the chip? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, maybe not the best user experience. You can, but I'm not going to say, you do you. More power to you. But just keep in mind what you're doing with the component at that point. Something else that we added with this release is something that folks have been asking for from a standalone component, but we realized that this is such a big component and it has so many potential moving pieces and so many areas of customization that we instead wanted to provide a template for all of you lovely folks out there and allow you to either just use this template as a standalone component, just include it and be able to add that anywhere in your application. Or you now have, since it's a template, you have the full source code available to be able to completely configure how you want the file manager to work. So file manager, the name kind of gives it away for those of you that haven't worked with Kendo UI in the past when we had a file manager available on the jQuery suite. It allows you to display folders that you have somewhere on the server. You can, completely customize what kind of folder structure that you want to be able to show to the user. And the user can now go through and see, add their own folders. They can upload files. They can download files, of course, available from here. You can also see that there's a little bit of a preview area on the right-hand side. So if you select one of the images, for example, you should be able to see an image on the right-hand side. So there's a lot going on in this component. And again, rather than just have something that's kind of restrictive, we wanted to give the full capability for customizing this, because you have control over what you want to do in terms of translating that folder structure into what you have on the server and vice versa, as well as what happens when folks upload a component, not a component, an image or a file, whatever it might be, and where that goes in the server, et cetera. So that's kind of why we offer it here as a template, but that's very exciting for those of you that are looking for a file manager in the React space. A big thing that also happened, Alyssa mentioned this in the Angular section, but we did add Bootstrap 5 support with this release. You can see here the toggle between Bootstrap 4.5 and 5, kind of what the difference that makes in some of our components that we have available. So yeah, this is something to keep in mind if you're working with the latest and greatest within Bootstrap. Bootstrap 5 is officially supported. All right, and then we have another poll. We have a couple of these questions floating around, and we'll just wait for the poll to pop up. I believe it is already up. Alyssa, you actually probably see it when I don't, so feel free to.
Yeah, you want me to read it?
Yeah,
so
that'd be
which
great.
of the following is the most accurate for your app design? We use an established design system as is. We are about to create our own design system from scratch. We have an existing design system we apply to Kendo UI, or we're not interested in design systems. Thank you, everyone who sent in questions and comments. After I stopped screen sharing, I got to go and check those out. And thank you again for our support team who's answering questions on the fly. It's beautiful. Thank you.
Oh yeah, I see a ton of questions being answered, which is great. So yeah, sincere thank you to all the people behind the scenes that are helping us out make this webinar go as smooth as possible. Yeah, it seems like right now, at least looking at some of the live data coming in here, it seems like the existing design system seems like the most accurate description for most people, coming in roughly at 50%. It seems like we're right at 49% for that, and then almost evenly split between the other options there. So we use an established design system. We're about to create our own, as well as we're not interested in design systems. But all right, so enough with that poll. Let me go ahead and continue to jump in and share my screen, because now the exciting part here is the KendoReact demos. Now let me make sure that I'm alt tabbing to the right set of demos that I have open. I have a lot of tabs to deal with today. In fact, having that scrollable tab functionality that you highlighted in the Angular components could help out today within my Chrome instance here. But what I'm covering in terms of the demos can all be found on our live demo site. I did this a little bit for convenience, as well as, of course, helping you be able to navigate through this on your own. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. We'll see how much I break the rest of the demos doing this. But as I mentioned, if you do go to our docs and demos for React, any new component you'll see here is labeled new, nice and easy. And then also any updated component that we actually added some functionality to, you can see here there's a little updated tag next to it. Also, for those that are interested, there's some bold items here. Those are essentially our top level packages. So within the dropdowns package, we have a couple of components. Essentially, when you include this, right, through some tree shaking, you can ensure that you only actually download what you need within the end result of the application when you publish it, right, rather than include all the components. But this is just a little bit, from an organization perspective as well. So they share some common DNA, so it makes it easy to share some of the code that we have available there. But without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and go through some of these components, including the PivotGrid. So the PivotGrid actually is doing pretty well, even in the tiny real estate that I'm giving it here. But as you can see, the functionality here, right? If you are pivoting any form of data, whether it's in Excel or whether it's through a third-party component like this, there's a lot of configuration options you can offer to the end user. So I just wanted to, again, it might not necessarily highlight the component in the best light in terms of what's available to display now, but even when I have this change settings panel that flies out here and allows me to define what fields I want to interact with, the columns, rows I want to set up, etc. The component actually renders pretty well, right? Everything narrows down a little bit. Yes, it turns into just dollar symbols, but we still see the rows. We can still scroll around with it. So this is something that I just wanted to shout out as a big kudos to the team that put this together, that the component, even in a suboptimal amount of real estate, still functions and behaves well. Now, dealing with data within the PivotGrid is a little bit tricky, so I'm actually going to jump over here into the left-hand side, scroll down to the PivotGrid section, and go into the data binding section, because right now the KendoReact PivotGrid supports data binding to an online analytical processing, or OLAP cube. So if you are not familiar with an OLAP cube and you're not 100% sure really how to set that up, first, we do have some OLAP fundamentals as well as some OLAP cube setups that you can work with. And then we also have a sample OLAP service that we use within our all of our documentation and demos here. And you can also feel free to use if you're just playing around with the component and seeing what you need to do in order to be able to data bind. Once you've done that, if I jump into the source of this, it's actually not too bad working with the component and actually defining the PivotGrid. So if I let me open this as StackLayout so we can maybe see this a little bit easier. And then I'll zoom in on this as well, I hope. Yeah, there we go. So really, we have set up a couple of default column axes and row axes. So these are some of the items that you saw within the configurator that when I pop that open on the right-hand side over here, let me actually move the GoToWebinar window around a little bit. So when this pops up, right, that correlates to what we have over here. And then we are providing the URL just to that MSMD pump DLL, right? And passing that into the component. So there's really, once you start diving into the PivotGrid, I'm not the best OLAP cube expert out here. I'm not going to flaunt any credentials that I do not have. So I'm sure this makes a lot of sense for those of you that deal with OLAP cubes in the daily. I do not. But like I mentioned, if we jump back into the data binding, we have some of the OLAP fundamentals that should help in terms of what is OLAP, what is an OLAP cube, what are some of the basic cube concepts. And then, for those of you that are looking to, I'm just moving the GoToWebinar window back. That's why my eyes were over to the side. If any of you are dealing with PivotGrids and you want some additional way to be able to data bind and you want to work with pivoting data like this in some capacity, let us know and we'll see what we can do in terms of adding additional ways for you to interact with and add data into your OLAP, or I should say the PivotGrid. Doesn't have to be through the OLAP at that point. All right, so that's enough of the PivotGrid. The MultiSelectTree, as I mentioned before, right, it starts off as a simple input element. We see this kind of area right here. There's just a simple text box, and as soon as I focus it, we get this lovely drop down where I can go ahead and select the top level item here. So then we see that all the tokens were immediately added. And I can also close this off if I want to be able to just say, you know, I didn't really want everything there. And if I open this back up, we can see that we now get this kind of indeterminate state, you know, highlighting that, yeah, there's some, but not all are selected under here. And so everything is reflected in, of course, the list here, as well as the selection that you have beneath. While I'm here, I can also showcase how the new theme chooser looks and feels. So as Alyssa mentioned, we have the ability for you now to not just select the default Bootstrap and the material theme throughout all of our docs and demos. You can now also work with swatches for each one. A swatch is essentially a collection of recommended color palettes from our designers you can utilize with any one of our themes. So for example, the default theme, we have main dark, you know, if you want to be a little bit, dark mode, ooh, so edgy. So you can do that, right? You can also jump into the material theme, for example, and do something like lime dark, so a little bit of a spin on the dark theme here with a little bit of lime in there. And now this is saved throughout all of the applications. All of the samples that we have available here within our documentation. So if I want vintage on the Bootstrap 5 theme, I now get this nice little vintage color scheme. I'm actually going to keep on using that for the rest of the demos. Although all the tabs are open already, so I'd have to refresh, so probably not going to happen. But either way, you see, right, the kind of flexibility here. And if you want to modify these a little bit or create your own swatch, you can just select Launch Theme Builder here, and it will throw you into our theme builder where you can go ahead and actually customize some of our available themes just with a couple of clicks. All right, just checking where I am on time. I still got plenty of time. That's great. All right, moving on to the heat map component. So as we mentioned, right, and this is something that, you know, you probably see contributions per day in this lovely green color. That's something that we're all used to on GitHub, right? Took some vacation in here, I'd say. Anyways, the idea here, right, is that you can provide, as we can check out in the source code, we just need to define a particular color here, and then the component really takes care of the rest. You can even, you see that we have rounded rectangle. You can actually change a little bit of what each one of these items look like. So a rounded rectangle would give us this little space here. If you want it to be completely squared off, you can. You can also control some of the spacing. And what is nice, if I go ahead and inspect this, and you know, it might be a little bit tiny. I'm running on a pretty big screen here, and you can see there's a lot going on. But this is all SVG. That's really what I'm trying to show here. And as I mentioned, so we can also
saying it's not just Angular that renders as SVG.
Exactly. A little thing that I can mention here is actually our data visualization library across all of our different packages. So Vue, you'll see that in a bit as well. jQuery, Angular, React. They actually share an engine because all it's doing is outputting SVG or Canvas. So you don't necessarily have to write something completely from the ground up for Angular, React, Vue, and jQuery in order to be able to take advantage of the data visualization. So because we added the heat map into the core package, that means that other flavors can take advantage of it, which is what we're seeing here. So absolutely, Alyssa. It's not just Angular that renders it as SVG. So each one of these components, when you dive into the heat map, you can actually do that either in SVG or, as I mentioned, Canvas as well, so if you'd like to, through a configuration option. So this is a neat little component. We do, again, have you know, some additional samples here, right, to show off having this kind of more actual rectangles instead of little squares, and having little to no spacing in between. Hopefully you can also see that just on hovering, as I hover around here, that you get a little bit of a highlight for each of the cells as you're hovering over it. So it's a nice little component to be able to add in and work with some additional data visualization. Continuing the list of components that we added with this release, we have the Breadcrumb component. And just as you can see here, we can go back to where we have absolutely just nothing here. We can go to home, press refresh data, and we're back here. If you, of course, want to customize this in some way where you highlight the current tab in a certain way, or maybe you have the entire structure, you just want folks to be able to click around, you definitely can. Here in this particular sample, we just have an array that has an ID, text, and then we also have an icon class in case we want to be able to add in icons. And we're using the built-in KendoReact icons, but if you want to use something like Font Awesome, you could also do that. And then this, all this code actually is mostly just around handling, clicking around and taking items away if you like to. When it comes to actually just data binding, all you have to do is look at the data property, pass in that array, and you're good to go. So super flexible component, and you have a lot of options you can work with in terms of what happens when users interact with the breadcrumb. All right, the typography component, as mentioned when we covered it in the slide, provides a lot of out-of-the-box, essentially inheriting from the KendoReact themes, styling for different font elements that you have within your application. So you can see it kind of in action here of we have typography.h1, .h2, h3, h6, and you see all that you need to do in order to be able to add this into your application is just have the typography component imported from KendoReact Common. And then after that, if you go ahead and customize the look of an H1 somewhere in your CSS, the core level for the KendoReact components, you can now have your developers consume that by just saying typography.h1. And then anywhere throughout your application, if you decide, well, actually for our design, we're going to restyle the way all H1s look, you now no longer have to go through and say, oh, wait, did somebody customize or override some CSS here or there? You know that if they use the typography component, then that styling will just automatically be picked up as soon as you update that core styling. So super nice for those who want that consistency across your application. I recognize that not everybody will immediately use the typography component, and that's okay, but it is an option out there for those of you that are looking for that consistency and look and feel. All right, the StackLayout component, as we mentioned, right, allows you to have either a vertical or horizontal, and you can actually switch between that. Just look at how big that corgi face becomes when you do that. That's excellent. Just want to boop that snoot. But as we scroll down, we see that we have the same, by the way, another boopable snoot. But I can scroll back up again and go back to horizontal. If I view this in the source, we see that we add in the cards and all the building blocks of the cards, as well as the avatar component in there to be able to create those individual cards. But the real magic really happens when we look into the component. So you can see here that within the stack layout, all that you really need to do is wrap that around whatever elements you want to be able to hang out together, right, in that kind of stacked orientation. And the orientation property is actually what you use in order to pass in horizontal and vertical. So that's super easy to just switch in between. You don't have to do this crazy math around it. It's just one single property that you can toggle between. And then from there, we have some CSS classes that you can use. So for example, KFlex, in order to be able to help out a little bit with how you want to lay out everything within that stack layout. But in this case, we added some cards. You can add whatever you want in there. And then the component itself kind of takes care of how to structure it with that vertical or horizontal orientation. So super easy to start using and pick up, and hopefully that's something that folks find useful. All right, we also have the grid layout, which similarly, right, follows into a type of CSS kind of helper now exposed as a component. And if I scroll down, because we have a lot of data in terms of what we have available within the component there, we see that we start by simply defining the grid layout. We have a gap configuration option that we can set up. We have then the rows that we can pass in, right? So we have individual row elements that then define the height of each row. And then we also have the columns that we can define. So now we set up kind of our skeleton for how we want the rows and the columns. And then from there, we simply define grid layout items. and decide which row and which column they're available in, as well as in this particular case, if we want something to actually ride over additional columns, so you have a column span property that you can interact with. So this is makes it really easy to just decide, okay, this is how my application should be structured. I want this to take up exactly be on row 1, column 1, and that's it, or I want to have it be on that first row but span all the columns. So you have a lot of flexibility here in how to define each one of these items. And then from there, these other components we have are just items that we have when it comes to having the article headers, etc., that we all define up here. All right, still got about 5 minutes or so left, so let's see if I can crank through the rest of these samples here. So the grid, as I mentioned, the ability to resize the column. If we see this little icon pop up, right, that allows me to resize. And if I just double click that, it goes ahead and makes it auto adjust to what we have available in the column here. You can also, by the way, have it set up so that it also ensures that the column headers are included, as I mentioned. So yeah, it's a nice little, once users have kind of become used to this, it's nice and easy for them to be able to just make sure that everything auto adjusts. Very nice when you have multiple columns, right? More than maybe what we have here, and you want to be able to make sure that you organize it a little bit. We also have the ability to group and ungroup through the group column header here. So as you click on the 3 dots, you see now that we can group by this column. So if we want to group by the product name, actually that won't be too useful. Let me go ahead and group by discontinued. So you can see that we are now grouping. So all the falses are here initially, and of course we can expand and collapse this and then go down and see the additional items that are false as we page throughout the data. So just another way, normally when you group, right, you either do programmatically ahead of time or you drag and drop a header to have it appear here at the top. The tree list, within actually the tree list selection demo, you see now that we've updated this to be able to do drag selection. So if I just drag over these cells, we see now that I selected them. I can also, using Control, if I wanted to, click through each individual one and add multiple. I can enable, for example, single selection mode if I just want to select a single cell or row. But the new feature that we added is this lovely little range selection, which also we can see in the Gantt demo that does the same thing. So if I just drag over here, and we now see that I selected those cells. And again, you can tinker around with the different behaviors of selection mode with this configuration option that we have up here. Just toggle things on and off. All right, SVG support. So the tooltip component, if I now hover over this, you see the KendoReact Kendoka tooltip up here. And for those of you that don't believe me, this is just all SVG representing the Kendoka. And all that we need to do in order to be able to work with the tooltip here, right, is similar to what you might have done in the past, which is you can just wrap around the SVG element if you like to, in order to be able to say anywhere within the SVG element. If you hover over it, this is the tooltip that will be displayed. All right, the chip component, we have this customization section that really goes through how you can add for example, avatars in there. You can have a custom select icon. So when you select something, you see now that each individual chip has a unique icon that pops up. You can also do a custom remove icon. And then this is kind of what we did with this particular release, is that within this chip component, we now have set reminder, we have and this vertical kind of separator that we've all defined through spans, and you can pass that in and even update your own style within the chip as well as you'd like to. So you can really fully customize and control what's available within the chip. All right, and the file manager, as I mentioned, this is something you'll find under sample applications, the file manager template, because it has so much functionality in here. right now, right, we've built this out to be able to give you a very similar structure to what you might be able to find in the jQuery view of the file manager that you might be used to if you come from the jQuery side of things. But this has been, of course, completely built for React, right? And integrates a lot of our existing components. You see the breadcrumb up here in action. You see some of our buttons, our upload component, a splitter. There's a lot going on here. So we're offering this as more of a sample application rather than an individual component, again, because we want to give you the flexibility to be able to customize this to make it your own and fit into your application naturally. All right, and in the last minute that I have here, I'm just going to mention we have the Kendo UI kits for Figma. So the material, bootstrap, and the default themes are all available as Figma kits. And for those that are interested, if you pop over to Figma, you'll see that under the app progress tag here, you'll see that we have material, bootstrap, and default all listed here. So for those of you using Figma, you have a lot of our components already available, and we will continue to add more here as we go throughout the rest of this year and into 2022 as well.
We did get some chat around that about people using Figma kits. So it's really cool to see.
Yeah. Figma is definitely blowing up in the design space for sure. But okay, so that was what we had with the demos. I want to jump back into the agenda for everybody here. And that is our time for KendoReact. So it is now time to jump into Kendo UI for jQuery. So for those of you that have been waiting for jQuery, here is some good news. Let's cover what's new in R3 2021 for Kendo UI for jQuery. So just as a reminder, we have a lot of new components, the Heatmap, OrgChart, Captcha, Popover. We also have the Figma UI kits that I just mentioned. We have the Bootstrap 5 support. We have jQuery 3.6.0 support. We have updated the theme picker, just like you saw in the other products. We've also done some form enhancements, as well as a large swath of accessibility improvements across all of our components. Well, let's jump into the new components. So the heat map, just like you saw on the React side, for those of you that have been, and the Angular side, for those of you that have been with us throughout the entire webinar, the heat map component provides you with a nice data visualization where all you have to really do is define the values of the X and the Y axis that you want to have here, throw in, of course, the data, and then you set the color, and it will automatically start that scale from almost white into whatever color that you have as defined. Now, as I mentioned before as well, SVG and Canvas are both elements that you can choose here just through configuration options for how you want the component to be displayed. Now, the OrgChart component is something I think a lot of people are excited about because this was the most voted for a component on the jQuery side, and I'm so happy that we can introduce this with this release. So previously, jQuery developers, I know that you've been working with our diagram component, and you were creating an OrgChart through that, but we decided that it's much better for us to create a standalone component that is specifically focused on creating an OrgChart, and that's why we have the standalone OrgChart. Now, what we see over on the left-hand side is a pretty just straight up and down right-hand side. Did I say left-hand side? Right-hand side. And we see, I know my left's from right, I promise. But
I don't, so that's one that you have.
I promise I do. Yeah, it's pretty much just, from CEO down to operation manager, operator to team lead, it's all kind of top down like that. But if you want to have this spread out a little bit more, you have multiple people on a certain level, you can certainly feel free to do so as well. We offer full template support. You can drill down further into items that are selected. You see those 3 dots. You can provide additional items through a menu that appears there. You can, of course, expand collapse items. So you can, even if you have a full organization, with thousands of people in there, you have the ability to navigate through that a little bit more by opening and closing the groups that you have. So a little minus button that you see is what I'm referring to there. We also added the Captcha component. I had to make an arrow down there so you can see what I'm talking about. But of course, Captcha, everybody knows that pretty much what they are. You have to prove that you're not a robot. So we added this into the jQuery suite, which again happens to be one of the most requested components. we not only do you have, of course, the ability to do what we see here, which is just text with some kind of filtering on there, right, in order to be able to confuse the bots. If you want to, you can also use the audio reproduction of the image that's displayed there, which actually can work from a security perspective as well as an accessibility perspective. The Captcha is a fun, unique component on the jQuery side. We actually added some server-side helpers with the jQuery component in this case, because Captcha, if it's completely on the client side, can actually be a little bit broken. It's easy to circumvent. So there is going to be a server-side element involved with this component, which is unique in the jQuery space for sure when it comes to our components, but so something to keep an eye on when we jump into the demos there. We also added the popover component. So different than the tooltip. The tooltip generally displays some simple content. Maybe you provided a template that provided a little bit more of intricate than just kind of text. However, a popover takes it to the next level, and you see over here on the right-hand side, see, I know my left from right, that we have August 12th, and then we have all of the events listed out for that particular day. And this is something that if you have Google Calendar or Outlook and you look into the calendar there, when you hover over items, no matter what operating system you're on, you generally see a tooltip that appears with some more information. Maybe it's the text that's available in the event, who's attending, if it's MS Teams or whatever else kind of meeting, right? That's all available within the popover. So this really takes that ability to hover over an item or click on an item and get more information without necessarily drilling into the full thing. So in this particular case, August 12th, we have a couple different meetings on that particular day that we're highlighting through the popover. I mentioned this in the beginning as well, but we are introducing the Figma UI kits for jQuery folks as well. You can actually see a full list of the available technologies, right? So React, Angular, Vue, jQuery, Blazor, ASP.NET Core, and ASP.NET MVC. All of those component libraries can take advantage of the Kendo UI kits for Figma, and we have that kit available for default, Bootstrap, and Material themes. So all the themes that we have out of the box. We also had a Bootstrap 5 support with this release, so you can see the toggle between 4.5 and 5.0. And so for those of you that are looking to work with the latest and greatest, you can feel free to do so, upgrade to Bootstrap 5 and use the latest theme. If you are a little bit not necessarily ready to upgrade to Bootstrap 5 quite yet, don't worry, our theme actually can support Bootstrap 4 for a while as well. So you can kind of work with that in your applications if you're not ready to upgrade the styling quite yet. Nothing really more exciting than a new jQuery version, right? Even in today's world, right? So jQuery 3.6.0 came out during this release cycle. So of course we have support for jQuery 3.6.0. And as we saw on the React side, but I want to highlight here within the jQuery demos as well, we did update the theme picker. So now when you decide, okay, what theme do we want to showcase throughout all of our demos, or just you want to be able to get an idea of what the different themes might look like with maybe some different color variations. We have the swatches through the default theme, the Bootstrap theme, and the Material theme, all hand selected by our designers to allow you to give a little bit of an easier time to just pick something that kind of fits with what you're working with. I know that I generally have to rely on any type of service that gives me a color palette if I pick a main color, because otherwise I will not be able to pick colors that go together. So this is nice to have out of the box and not really have to worry about if one color clashes. You know, you're not picking some crazy purple color with some, you know, I don't know, mustardy yellow. I think those don't go together. Those color experts out there might want to correct me. Yeah, anyways.
I think you just disrupted my life's color scheme, so.
Oh yeah, yeah. I tried to, you know, mustard yellow. I don't think a lot of people like mustard yellow.
No, really? Oh, it fits right within my, like, I love like flower wallpaper and mustard yellow. My husband wishes I didn't, but.
Yeah, I guess that's true. All right, so, you know, I'll take that back. Maybe just not in combination with the purple. Either way, you see here, this kind of dialogue is exactly why you can just pick one of the swatches and you don't have to worry about it.
Mm.
All right, we also added some form enhancements. So for those who are using the form component, we did a couple of things. First, we added the text box and text area UI components that are available through Kendo UI for jQuery already. And we added them in as default components within the jQuery form component. Before, we just relied on the native HTML elements. Then we also have the ability to do hidden fields within the form component. So I know that every form out there has a hidden field. I think that must be a true statement. I feel like it is. Almost always you're adding something to those fields when you're hitting submit, whether it's you're pulling something out from the query string, for example, in the URL, or if you're adding something else into the application you want to have saved with this particular field, you can do so without, of course, autofilling that for the user, having them be able to edit it or freak out of, hey, what's that data? What's that doing there? You can now use the hidden fields feature in order to be able to hide that and still have that as a part of your submission. And we added a ton of accessibility improvements. So I don't have a full list of very detailed aspects of what we did. Instead, what I can mention is that throughout all of our components, and we actually are continuing this effort as well, we're constantly taking a look at how we can improve accessibility, and not just from the screen reader perspective, but ensuring that we're following the standards out there. So with this release, we spent a lot of time on improving accessibility across the board. But one thing that we saw come out of this is the jQuery pager component, the standalone pager, actually received a ton of additional accessibility updates there. So if you're using the standalone pager, or maybe you're using it in combination with some of other components, upgrading to R3 2021 will make it that much more accessible, which is great. And now we have the last poll of the day. So I'm gonna, hopefully one of the helpers here will pop this up, and I see that they just did, but I cannot see what it says. So Alyssa, if you mind helping me out again, that would be great.
What do you think about the new Kendo UI kits for Figma? So I know I asked you to plop in chat, but this might be an easier way of answering. They will make collaboration with design easier. I like the idea, but need kits for a different design tool. We don't have a use case for them, or I didn't know about them. So tell us, please. Got quite a few right now on I didn't know about them, so that's really cool. We've got, I think, 15% of they will make collaboration with design easier so far. So keep answering, please, and thank you for participating in not only the poll right now, but also for being here for this webinar and chatting up with us. It's been a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, and I see here a lot of people don't know about them, which that makes sense, right? Previously, the only product that we kind of mentioned them for was React specifically, but now you can see them across all the product suites. So I think that can kind of explain why that might be a little bit higher up there. And you'll definitely know about them as we, of course, continue to chat about them either through webinars or through our content. It seems like we have roughly 20% or so say they don't have a use case for them. Some folks out there, you might be asking about Sketch or Adobe XD files as well, which is something that we're also working on. But the Figma kits just happen to be there kind of primarily. And yeah, we have a couple of folks that see that they might want to use them as well, so that's always exciting. The Figma kits are great. I can't rant enough about them, honestly. It's more than just a placeholder kind of skeleton of one of our components. If you do something like the grid, for example, it really has individual elements within it to help you customize the look and feel of the grid and all its containing components, as opposed to just kind of a wireframe placeholder. So it's great.
Yeah. Now it makes a lot of sense for us to fill that gap between developers and designers, because that's our gap to fill for all of our dev tools. So it's great that we're now offering that. And as Carl mentioned, more and more components will be supported in the future. So
exactly. So only more good news to come. But all right, let me look over on my left-hand side here to see where I am going to tab into. And there we go. My second screen here is being super helpful. So as with all the other products, if I scroll in here, we see a full list of all the components that are available. And in jQuery, folks, you are spoiled. Just look at the number of components that you have available. It's almost hard to see where the new and the updated ones are. You kind of get lost. You need a map to go through this. But as always, you have the new tag and then the updated tag that helps you kind of organize things a little bit more to make that clear. But if we jump into some of the first new components, so the heat map, as I mentioned on the React side, but I'll do this here for those of you joining in here on the jQuery side of things as well. This is just one big SVG element with individual elements. I'm not going to go in here and debug everything because that's I do not know enough about SVG to do that comfortably. So I'm going to minimize that, and then GoToWebinar is just perfectly exactly where I need it to not be. All right, let me move that back. And then and what's nice too is that what we didn't see in the React demo, for those of you who've been sticking around the entire time here, is that we also have tooltips that fit with the color of each individual cell that you hover over here. So that's kind of a nice little touch, right? Actually, you can even see that I can zoom in. That's what happened. That's what's happening right now when you use the scroll wheel. So if you just want to look at this 9 really deeply, you can. The way that this is set up is, you know, the easiest way to, of course, work with any kind of chart that we have, right, is very similar if you've seen this in our other charting solutions or other chart components, right? You define the Kendo chart, you define the series, and then this type heat map is what sets that apart from another series if, you know, you're doing lines or a bubble or whatever it might be. And then within the tooltip, what's nice is that just like all the other tooltips that we have available, you can define a template. You can use this data binding syntax we have to grab information about the data item. And then in this particular case, we're just grabbing, you know, the fields available within the data item by using 0 and 2. But you can inspect the data item to get an understanding of what is there and underlying. So for example, you know, if you wanted more data than just these, but you only really wanted to wire up, you know, who committed and when they committed and the value of what they committed, you can do so. You can still pass that data in. But then all you really need to worry about is within the component, you just say, okay, these are the fields that I want to use. If you have additional data item pieces that you want to add in here, so additional fields, you can do that and then have that be available in the template if you like to. All right, making sure that we stay on time. I can do this. With the OrgChart component, this is what I was referring to when you don't necessarily just have to have one straight line. You can have it kind of spread out a little bit, right? I can open up some of these additional items, and we see now that the component does shift over a little bit. And let me see if I can, yeah, it's because I'm zoomed in a little bit. It's going to be a little bit awkward. But in each one of these items, you can, for example, we have the ability for you to do editing. You can do, you see over here on the left, I'm sorry, by grouping. You can define templates if you like to. I should actually highlight that. So in this particular case, you know, we have a template for the item as well as the group that they're a part of, if we want to kind of highlight that. And yeah, there's a lot of flexibility in here. You can do load on demand for those of you that need a lot of people to showcase. It's simply that what happens here is that anytime you press the plus sign, it will load the data needed for that hierarchy. So great if you're dealing with a lot of data and you still want users to be able to navigate through the entire organizational structure, you can do so. But load on demand is great in that particular case. And of course, we have examples of how you can bind to local data as well as remote data. All right, the Captcha component, which we see down here. Let me jump into what we have within the form so we can see what we have available here. So in this particular case, we are actually using the Kendo form component, which is nice to see. So we set up the form data, you know, we provide the items, but we do have this Captcha field, which allows us to set up a Captcha. Now, what we have is, you see that we have the handler and the audio handler and the validation handler. And these are actually URLs that we're utilizing and calling something on the server, because again, Captcha component that is purely client side, it's not the safest thing. It can easily be circumvented. So what will be important here is just ensuring that you have the proper things on the server side. So as I mentioned, for .NET folks specifically, we do have some helper classes you can work with on the server side of things, which is very helpful. And of course, we'll expand that as well, depending on what folks need from us in terms of backend integrations, and we'll see what other libraries we can come up with. But I know a lot of you folks are dealing with .NET, so we kind of provided that out of the box. But yeah, Captcha, once you have that set up in terms of you know, just adding the component somewhere, anywhere on the page. It really is these handler pieces that you have to worry about, and outside of that, you're off to the races. All right, and the last component that I have here before we start running out of time is the Popover component, which is now integrated into the calendar component. So you see nothing happens on dates where I don't have special highlighting for, and when I click on the 12th, you see this element pop up here. And if we jump into just what that looks like, we have a create popover event here, or function, I should say, sorry, that allows me to define the Kendo popover. We can define, you know, show on click, it can be on hover, it can be on a lot of different things. And we just simply, we are attaching it to the elements that we customize here. So this just, you know, makes the demo look a little bit easier to deal with. Then out of the box, you have the header, which you can provide a template for, as well as the body, which you can provide a template for. And if we jump into the templates demo, you'll be able to see that in action as well. As you see now that we even have a nice little close button that we can select here if we'd like to. So a lot of customization can be done out of the box with this seemingly simple component, but there's a lot of power there. And the last thing that I wanted to mention is the form component and the enhancements that we did here. As I mentioned, really the big thing is that we have, you know, text area and text box components out of the box now, and we also have the ability for you to define hidden fields if you like to, when you want to add a little bit of additional information into the form that you're pushing back, and you might want to auto-populate that from something. And then the last thing, again, the Figma kits are available on Figma. If you just go to figma.com/@progress, so that's the handle here for Progress as a whole, you'll find material, bootstrap, and default. And that was a whirlwind, but that is what's new for jQuery developers. And last but not least on the day here, so we can see that I am just 1 minute over, but we will cover Kendo UI for Vue and what's new there. I think everybody, I see there's a little bit of delay in what's being displayed, so I just wanted to give folks a chance to catch up. And Kendo UI for Vue, we added a lot with this release. Actually, if you count it all out, it's 35 new components and helper libraries, so there's a lot in here. Yeah, I know, right? It's a big release. A lot of this comes from all the different chart components we added with this release. We added the Spark line. We have PDF generator, so you can export all your content to PDF, TabStrip, Pager, Form, Avatar, Card, Label and Floating Label, Checkbox and RadioButton, and of course the Figma UI Kit, and then Bootstrap 5 support. And I even have an add more section here because we just don't have time for everything just on this particular slide. So a lot is out there for Vue, and those of you that aren't familiar, we originally created Kendo UI for Vue as a wrapper around the jQuery library as we were building out the native components. So all of these are new native components built from the ground up for Vue and are replacing the need for any one of those wrap components. So that's why, you know, we see a lot of components in Vue because that is the youngest library that we have. But with this release, we added so much. Charts, all the charts you're used to with Kendo UI, you have available out of the box. So you have 16 different chart types, including the bar, column, area, line, scatter, stock chart, and many more. As with all the data visualization components, you can render this as SVG or Canvas just through a configuration option. Sparkline takes that idea of a chart and just makes it a little bit smaller. So this can be injected either into the middle of a list of unordered items like we have here in the screenshot. It can be added into cells of the grid. It can be added in a tooltip if you'd like to, right? The Sparkline is there when you don't necessarily need to display, you know, the full X and Y axis, and instead just want to give a small data visualization that represents, you know, some important metric that you just want to make a little bit easier for folks to view rather than just have the raw data there. The PDF generator is exciting because this is a library that you can just use to either work with our components, like you see over on the right-hand side here, some of our charts and our grids and our buttons, or you can use any generic HTML. You can pass in a section of your page or the entire page, and it will export everything that's on there in a PDF file. So a very cool component to work with, or a helper library, I should say, and it's all done on the client side, so you don't even need to worry about any server-side interaction here. Super cool, definitely useful for those of you working with PDFs. TabStrip allows us now to have this tab layout like see over here: Paris, New York City, Taunton, and Sydney, right? Very similar to other TabStrips that you might have seen within the Kendo UI collection. And TabStrip is of course a very important layout element that we wanted to add with this release. The pager, and this is actually a customized pager that we see here, but we took the pager component, and that is a standalone pager. So you can now use this with our other components that need paging, or use this by yourself in some other capacity. In this case, we've actually gone real crazy with it, and we have customized this using a slider. If you want to be able to do so, you have full control over what's displayed within the pager if you don't just want the usual list of 1 through 10 or 20 and the navigation elements provided there. We also have the form components. So we believe that this lightweight form library can help you create and interact with forms within your Vue application. So we saw some success with this on the React side, that we're offering this out of the box, and we wanted to do something similar on the Vue side for you Vue developers. So you now have the availability to create and structure and interact with forms using the Kendo UI form library. Additionally, with this, we add, and you can see the hint there is the italicized content under feedback. That is the hint component in action. We also added the error component, which shows error validation messages under various input elements. So these are standalone components that we add in, but of course that they integrate well with the form component. We added the avatar component, which comes in a lot of different shapes and sizes. So on the right-hand side, you see that we can either work with initials of folks, you can work with actual pictures, it can be round, it can be square, it can be rounded. There's a lot of different things you can do here with the avatar component to just help your application pop a little bit. We had a native card component, which again, the blurriness of that image, should have double-checked that. But anyways, outside of all those pixels you can see, highly optimized. The card component is a nice little layout component that allows you to define headers. You can have an action area at the bottom. You can have the content. It has everything structured out in a component structure, so you can override any one of those components. You can pass in your own, and you have all the elements that you need in order to be able to structure out the card of your dreams just by using the Vue components available. Label and floating label. So label, of course, can be associated with any one of our input elements or really anything that you like to have a label for. Floating label, just like you see in the animated GIF over here, when you type in or enter a component for the first time, when you have a label inside of it, it floats up to the top, which is nice and convenient. And this is actually something that you'll be able to take advantage of throughout all of our input elements, including the date picker and the date time picker, actually, even though they're a little bit trickier. We're actively working on adding additional demos with a floating label, but yeah, you can take advantage of that across the board with our Vue components. All right, we also added in the checkbox and the RadioButton, and also the RadioGroup to help out manage RadioButton. So for those that just want some consistency in terms of look and feel across their applications within Vue, even something as simple as checkboxes, right, can ensure that you have that consistent look and feel. And the great thing about the component is that it works in unchecked, checked, or indeterminate states. And then on the RadioButton side, you have the individual RadioButton component, as well as a radio group that allows you to manage multiple radio buttons. All right, I'm just going to take a little bit of sip of drink here because I have been chatting.
You have. You've covered 100+ features in the last.
Yeah, I know. This is really running through the gauntlet with my slides here, but that's okay. I'm so excited about the release, so that adrenaline is just keeping me going here. On the Vue side, we also added the Figma UI Kit. So just like I've been talking about for the other libraries, default Bootstrap material themes have their UI kits for 30+ components, and we're adding more components as we speak. And it's just great for those who are using Figma. You can now take advantage of that, of course, with our Vue components. Bootstrap 5 supported here as well. So for those taking advantage of the latest and greatest within Bootstrap, updating your themes will give you that support. And as I mentioned previously, you can even work with older versions of Bootstrap if you would like to. You don't necessarily have to update, just to Bootstrap 5 if you don't have the time quite yet, although we do recommend that you do eventually. And here's the and more section. So we added the drawing library for those of you that want to have a library to help draw shapes on an SVG or canvas element. We have the data query library, which helps with dealing with data in our data-bound components like the grid, for example, massaging your data collection to include information about sorting, paging, filtering, all that good stuff. We have a file saver library that helps you have your end users be able to download files from your view applications to their desktop. That actually needs a little bit of help in order to be able to do that. We have the theme and color swatch picker updated within our docs and demos. We have improved keyboard navigation in the grid. So the grid has had keyboard navigation for a while, but this is actually, instead of what we did in the past was you could do keyboard navigation, but you were a little bit more in control over what you could do with keyboard navigation. In fact, it was up to you as a developer to define, are we dealing with tabs? Are we dealing with the keyboard, up and down arrows? Is there some other custom keyboard navigation that we want to do? But with this release, we have some additional sane defaults that allow you to, especially for those that go to the website and try keyboard navigation, try to figure that out, for accessibility testing or whatever it might be. These same defaults are just great to have available because they allow us, to just be off to the races without having to do additional customization. And then finally, we've done a lot of documentation enhancements. The youngest library in the Kendo UI suite, Kendo UI for View, we continue to add not just components, but additional features and documentation articles. And as we're getting more and more feedback from customers, and as we continue to see what people potentially struggle with and support, we go ahead and we make sure that we document that thoroughly. All right, and then we have a couple of minutes here for view demos. So I'm going to tab over. We'll see that we're back at our lovely demo overview where we can see the native view components here with all these new tags next to them. I mean, that is just crazy. Just look how many components we added with this release. But the big thing, I know, right? The big thing that we kind of did with this release, right, is first of all, the chart. So you can see here how that kind of is laid out. There's a lot that goes into the chart component. You can see if I scroll on the left-hand side, each one of these types of charts, right, they have some unique structure to them. But what's nice about our charting library is that all you really need to do is, you can even do away with the tooltip, the title, the legend. You just have to essentially pass in data and say, hey, on the x-axis, this is what we need to worry about in terms of fields. On the y-axis, this is what we need to worry about fields, and that's it. You then define the series that you want to display, and you can have multiple different types of series, right? You can define the type here, and if you want to have multiple series on one single chart, you can. So there's a lot of power coming from these charts. So really, I could spend the entire time just talking about the charts. But we added the spark line as well, which, as mentioned, right, allows you to have even some interactivity, right? Like this line chart with the tooltip there, and same thing here with the filled-in chart or the bar chart that we have here. So you can either have this just exist by itself, integrate into other components, and there's still some interactivity in there. The PDF generator demo, I definitely recommend that you check this out because all you need to do here is just click on export with component, export with method. So these are just two different ways that you can export content, and you can get all this lovely stuff exported into a PDF. So if I select a sports activity, basketball, that should be updating. Oh, what we have down here, maybe not. Either way, if I do export with component, we'll see that I get export 3, open that up here, and we now see that we have a full view of just what was available at the time when I hit export. For the TabStrip, the code here is pretty intuitive actually. So you just define the TabStrip component, and then you have TabStrip tabs, and that's about it. Each one of the TabStrip tabs, right, you can define as little or as much content that you want in there. Of course, we have some properties for each individual tab, and you can see what those are. If you jump into the tabs here, we have titles. You can have tabs that have initially loaded. You can have tabs that you load more information later. So there's a lot of flexibility there as well. A great layout component to work with. The pager, as I mentioned, it's a standalone paging component. You can completely customize the look and feel of this if you like to. If you jump into the template demo here, you'll see that You can pass in a page renderer, and from there you can get this kind of crazy pager if you like to. The form component, if we jump into the code to kind of see what this looks like. In this particular case, right, we have kform, we have @submit, we have handle submit, and then we have this form content. If I jump into that view file, we now see here that essentially the way that we set this up, right, is we have the form element, and then in there you can use a lot of traditional form structures, so field set, legends, etc. And then we have a lot of helper classes you can work with as well coming out of the box with the Kendo UI theme. So I definitely recommend to check that out to get an idea of how you can make forms look great without necessarily having to do a ton of custom CSS on your own. We also have the, by the way, the hint, as I mentioned, right, provides a little bit. If this demo loads, hopefully we'll see it. If not, we can see it down here. We can even do aligning it and have text direction either on the left or right-hand side. We have the error component. Let's see if I can make the stack list demo. I'm just going to refresh and hope the demo guys are happy with me. Here we see, right, that we have this field is required. So that's kind of in combination with the form component. The avatar. Just going to go ahead and why not just refresh all of these now that those demos are
I mean, you ask so much of your browser.
I know, I really, I am.
Hundreds of tabs.
Yep. But in this, with the avatar, right, it's pretty easy to get up and running. Again, avatar, you have a shape property, you can define a type. If you want to pass in an image, you certainly can do so as well. So you have within the avatar here, you provide an image tag, and you define the type to be of image, but then after that, you can pass in wherever you have that information stored. So lots of power coming out of this seemingly simple component. Same thing with the card component. As I mentioned, right, these are all aspects of the card. So you have the card, you have the header, title, subtitle, body, actions, footer, image. So there's a lot of different components you can use in order to structure out the card that you want to be able to use on your page. So you don't have to use all these. You can just use some if you like to. But the idea is that within your code, you define the card and then the header. So you have it all kind of semantically laid out, and it's an easy component to get up and running with. And then, you get that gorgeous kind of card view that I know a lot of folks are looking for. Labels, pretty simple, right? You have the label over there on the left-hand side. You can give it the ID of the editor that you want to attach it to, so they're connected, which is important, of course, for accessibility. But that is not much else to chat about outside the label there. Floating label, this nice slick interaction of being able to work with input elements and have that label float out. This does not just have itself tied to the material theme. You can use that with default Bootstrap. It's a generic floating label element that you can attach to a lot of different components. And in this particular case, the way that we do that is we wrap around the components. We have the K input here, and then again, we provide the ID that we can connect this to ensure that they are indeed connected. Checkbox, pretty simple. The checkbox component, right? Once you include that, you can have a default check to true. You can have the value of null, which then gives you the indeterminate state. And of course, you can even have an integrated label so that you have this label displayed either to the left or to the right if you like to.
That is so cool that they thought of that like in between. No, the in between state, because I was actually talking to somebody who was like working on that and not having the UI for that in between, and it was like a problem for their clients. And I was like, oh, yeah. I don't know. I always thought of it as like a Boolean. And
yeah, exactly. Same here.
Not interacted with. Yeah, that's.
Yeah, sometimes it's just null. You don't know what it is, and maybe that's something a user has to then update, right? That's a way that you can flag it in a grid editing scenario, for example. It has to be one or the other, but it is an important state for sure. This, by the way, is our radio button setup where you can be able, just like with the grid, just like with the checkbox. I'm losing my mind here towards the end. But you can very easily set up a radio button. You can work with multiple radio buttons if you want to have a full list, right, and have this then be able to just have one single item selected, which is when you should use radio buttons. And as I mentioned, right, for the group, you can define a group as well that you just pass in your data items, and then it can kind of data bind. So you don't necessarily have to just lay it out declaratively. You could also do something like this where you pass in a data collection and have it automatically fill everything out. And the last thing I want to mention is Figma kits. So for those of you that stuck around, you might have heard this quite a lot now, but for those that are just here for view, material, bootstrap, and default themes are all available here on the Figma page, figma.com/@progress. All right, I think I have a full minute left, maybe not even. So I'm going to jump back into these slides here and just do a last couple housekeeping items here. So everything that we talked about today, whether it's demos, new components, the what's new page, if you want to find additional information about what we talked about, the easiest thing to remember, if you just have one URL to remember, is telerik.com/KendoUI. That will allow you to navigate to all the different products. We also talk about this release as well as a ton of other things on telerik.com/blogs. So if you're interested in what's new there that I wrote, Alyssa blogs there, all of our dev advocates blog, there's a ton of different content, not just related to Kendo UI, if that's what you're interested in. So I highly recommend that as well. But it seems like we are out of time. This is 1:05 is when we need it to end, and I see that it is 1:05 over on my other screen. So I know there's been a ton of questions. I've also seen that all of our helpers have gone through and assisted everybody, which hopefully, if there are any questions left over, we'll of course continue to reach out and make sure that we can answer those questions. But I thank everybody for joining. Thank everybody working behind the scenes to make this webinar happen. And that will be it for Alyssa and myself, and we will see you either in one of the upcoming streams on Twitch or in the next release webinar. Thank you for joining, everybody.